Aloha. Well, I want to thank Joan and all of the volunteers and everyone and the dolphins who are making all of this possible. This is the third time that I've had the privilege of coming to Kona and participating in a revelatory conference here in this hotel. It's becoming like the site of many revelations. And I feel like the earlier two conferences that I participated in, one in 2005, the Dolphin Extraterrestrial Conference, and then I think it was the year after, the Extraterrestrial and World Peace Conference. They were sort of preparatory for this conference. So it's like the upward spiral. And today, I'd like to share with you dimensions, the dimensional ecology of the multiverse. And this is like a preview of my next book, my coming book, Dimensions, Dimensional Ecology of the Multiverse, which will be published either toward the end of this year or at the beginning of 2012. And the subtext of that is how Earthlings, extraterrestrials, parallel universes, the afterlife, souls, and source, whom other people say is God, or some people say that, interact in a dimensional ecology. And I'd like to acknowledge how much I've learned from my two colleagues, Andrew Bashago and Laura Eisenhower, because over the more than decade that I've worked with Andy, and increasingly a longer period that I worked with Laura, I've learned a great deal from them. And many of the insights that I have here, I've been able to come to as a result of our colleagueship and our interactive learning through this time period, this decade that we've been working together. Down at the bottom, that's the that's the cover of the iconic book Exopolitics, which you learned yesterday had been time traveled back from 2005 to 19
or later
or later to 1971, was it? 1971, where Andy and his father and Connie Chavez, and if it came down his father through a pouch, there was a whole infrastructure that had seen it. Carol was telling me yesterday at dinner that one of the triggers for her coming to the conference was that she heard that my book Exopolitics had been time traveled back to where Andy saw it in 1971. So it's a time travel artifact, and I think it's a good introduction to the type of thought that and paradigm that will be becoming predominant during our coming century here. And so I recommend it too. You can get it at Amazon.com or at exopolitics.com. And so anyway, that's what we'll be doing. Oops, no, wow, there we go. And so just a brief overview. We'll cover a number of topics, and that is the dimensional ecology of the multiverse. We'll cover the dimension-based typology of extraterrestrial civilizations. We'll start out through the various dimensions of the typology, the third dimension, solar system, and deep space civilizations, hyperdimensional civilizations, extraterrestrial or interdimensional intelligent civilizations, governance bodies, and then we'll get into other aspects of the dimensional ecology. In other words, exopolitics and the interlife. which is a special part of the multiverse. We'll see that there's an exopolitics dimension to the multiverse and a spiritual dimension, and each of them has their function, and we relate differently to each part of those. And this is sort of the time of the coming together of spirituality and science. So it's in that kind of framework and that sort of spirit that this PowerPoint has been developed. I remember that I used to go from time to time to the Sterling Memorial Library at Yale, where I spent 7 years as an undergraduate, a law student, and a member of the economics faculty. And I'd go in there and look up the classic work on evaporation. It was Evaporation by Alfred Weber, who was my grandfather, after whom I'm named. And he wrote the classic treatise on evaporation. So I'm not sure if exopolitics is the same thing, but kind of, a certain way, sort of with a sense of humor. Okay, so we'll start out, and I'd like to go through this sort of in a formalistic way, and you know, approach it through the scientific method, so that this is actually official knowledge. And I was approached by Oxford University Press, which is a division of Oxford University, to write a book on extraterrestrial civilizations and the law. And in order to do that, I had to develop a new typology of extraterrestrial civilizations, because one didn't exist. So that what you're seeing now is actually has been developed for, quote, the highest, one of the highest, I take due recognition of it, Cantab over here, Cambridge and Oxford. But it's kind of an inside joke, but anyway. I'm sorry. It's the dolphins that make me a little giddy, you know, excuse me. But so that if people try to say, oh, that's just, you know, crazy Alfred Weber, no. This is actually sort of the inner sanctum of official scientific knowledge on the planet, and we're playing by the rules of science, which is official knowledge. So that's the goal, and that's the spirit in which this is brought out into the world. So it's time for us to claim our power and leave all the dirty tricks behind. So the dimensional ecology hypothesis says, we Earthlings live in a dimensional ecology of intelligent life that encompasses extraterrestrials in parallel dimensions and universes, souls in the afterlife dimensions, spiritual beings in the spiritual dimensions, and source within a multiverse, or all that is. And that's a picture of the Hubble Ultra Deep Space. Each one of those is meant to be a galaxy within our universe, and we know now that there's more than one universe, and so we don't know how many universes there are in the multiverse, but we're in one of them. The dimensional ecology hypothesis now can be supported and tested through the scientific method and the law of evidence using witness, documentary, and experimental evidence. And that's what we'll be doing in the course of this exercise or presentation. You know, and I'm thinking if you have questions, please write them down. I know that these first couple of slides at the beginning are a little bit abstract, but they're just to set the framework that we're now going to explore. It's really to state what the hypothesis is. And parallel universes or dimensions in the universe. Well, these vary and consist of bounded ranges and frequencies of energy. Dimensions can contain diverse levels of consciousness and life unique to that dimension. The function of dimensions is to promote the evolution of consciousness across dimensions. They're almost like hot houses for consciousness. Or we'll send you to the third dimension, and then you can do that one, and then there are a few others that you can go evolve up through. So they're like discrete frequencies of energy. Now, the dimensional ecology hypothesis, how does teleportation fit into the dimensional ecology hypothesis? Because this is a conference about dolphins and teleportation. And we have yet to come to how the dolphins fit into everything, which will come at the end. Teleportation within and between parallel realities of the dimensional ecology. Now, this is an assertion. I don't know if it's correct or not, but it's part of a hypothesis. And that is that teleportation is the method by which entities of intelligent civilizations navigate the dimensional ecology of the multiverse. That's the method that's used for navigating the dimensional ecology is teleportation. Now, Andy mentioned the 8 methods of teleportation, which included UBIs, out-of-body experiences. Well, that goes back to the Mayans. A colleague of mine, Will Allen, was photographing grays in the reflecting pool in front of the US Capitol when at the end of the reflecting pool, there appeared a number of ancient Mayans in full garb. And his hypothesis was that the grays had teleported them up into their craft and had time travel teleported them as sort of part of the array that they were demonstrating to him to photograph in front of the US Capitol to show that teleportation and multi-dimensions were happening. Here we have a gray extraterrestrial swimming in the reflecting pool, and at the end of the reflecting pool are ancient Mayans in full dress. That's a very interesting photograph, isn't it? In front of the US Capitol. It's kind of amazing. Well, there's an alternate interpretation which a colleague of mine in Spain at the New Light Conference in Mallorca advanced. She made a very interesting presentation where she showed that the Mayans actually, the reason why they deformed the skull was of their infants, and in their culture was to affect the optical nerve. And they actually achieved teleportation and time travel. Bodily teleportation and time travel of a natural nature. That was her hypothesis. So if she was right, then you could have had a confluence of the gray extraterrestrials in the reflecting pool, and these Mayans thought it was a great time travel target from ancient Maya civilization. We don't know. We'll leave it to analysis of the photograph and to the experts to figure that one out. Teleportation is the method. Teleportation can occur within dimensions, such as the time-space hologram we inhabit, which itself is an artificial, intelligently created artifact, or between dimensions and parallel universes. In other words, Andy was describing in his presentation last night an evidence-based demonstration of how teleportation had been achieved within the time-space hologram we inhabit. In other words, the artificial intelligent created artifact that we as 3D Homo sapiens beings inhabit. Are people with me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Or teleportation can occur between dimensions and parallel universes. For example, teleportation within and between dimensions of the dimensional ecology can occur through naturally occurring, that should say stargates. Somehow that thing got artificially changed it into stargazes, or interdimensional portals, as Jesus, the Mayans, and many advanced cultures taught. For example, at bodily death in the third dimension, a human soul has the option of proceeding to a dimension of light called the afterlife through a natural dimensional portal between the third dimension and the afterlife. And in one of the final segments here, we'll get to the evidence for that, and we'll get into some representations of the interdimensional portal that if one has a natural death, you say, follow the light. Well, that light is toward the interdimensional portal, toward the afterlife dimension. And now, because of more than 7,000 cases of hypnotic regression from soul memories in the afterlife, we have a very interesting picture of what the afterlife is like and what goes on there. It's highly technologized and really super modern. Teleportation and time travel within and between can also occur with advanced technology such as DARPA's quantum access, Tesla-based teleportation and time travel, which Andy has experienced and has presented here. It can also occur in, we know, gray extraterrestrial interdimensional ships and Pleiadian interdimensional spaceships. And how do we know that? Because we debrief people who have teleported and who have experienced time travel in these conveyances. And this is a photo taken by Will Allen. He was an officer in 3 administrations, in the White House in 3 administrations, the 2 Bushes and Bill Clinton, I think. And that's on July 16, 2002, and that's a hyperdimensional ET landing on one of the Senate U.S. Senate office buildings, and those traces above there, that's the hyperdimensional ET spacecraft generating its own wormhole to enter into 3D space from the dimension that it is based, or the dimension through which it's been, quote, traveling, end of quote. Is there anyone that is not following this? Or so it's fairly clear, yeah.
I guess the question is, looks like 6 panels of windows. Is that part of the...
Oh, that's just various enlargements that he took of the track of the interdimensional spacecraft as it's entering the space over the Senate office building before it lands on the U.S. Senate office building.
So that's all that's visible. That
Yeah.
And the 3 beams beside the building, that's part of the interdimensional.
That was his plotting of the trajectory of the wormhole as the spacecraft came in to land on the U.S. Senate office building.
And the ET ship itself is not visible to the naked eye.
It is, but it's going very fast.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, and he has he has a gray implant. He's been taken up into gray ships and has a gray implant, and they signal him where to go and start taking pictures. This is very rapid, so they don't have the type of confrontation that they had in 1952, July of 1952, in which Sabre jets were sent out and 2 Sabre jets were shot down.
Thank you.
Now, other aspects of the dimensional ecology hypothesis have to do with the effect of consciousness on interdimensional portal. And the God consciousness that creates dimensional entities like universes and their subcomponent dimensions, galaxies, and solar systems. What the physicist Nassim Haramein says is that there are singularities. These universes, galaxies, and solar systems are created around singularities. We can call them interdimensional portals. So the universe that we inhabit has an interdimensional portal through which you can enter and exit the rest of the multiverse. And within our universe, the galaxies each have interdimensional portals that we know as the galactic black hole. Science now knows, and it was confirmed finally after an 8-year test ending in 2008, that there is a black hole at the center of our galaxy. The Mayans called it Hunahpu. And that is actually an interdimensional portal out into the rest of the universe. And the interdimensional portal into our solar system is the sun. And you can go to exopolitics.com and you'll see photographs of large interdimensional craft entering in the portal of the sun into our solar system. And on our planets, the interdimensional portal are volcanoes. So that's why you'll tend to see a lot of interdimensional craft coming in and out of volcanoes, or even they're dormant volcanoes. That's where the portals tend to be. Some of the good news is that if you, and the illustration there is the time acceleration matrix in which a scholar, Carl Johan Kalman, has plotted what he considers to be the emanations from the interdimensional portal at the core of our universe over time. And this does it from 755 to actually this year. There's March 9, 2011, goes to October 28. And what that shows is that time is accelerating, the rate of change is accelerating, and the whole nature of the energy that our universe is now emitting into consciousness energy, that the universe is now emitting into our universe, because apparently the universe essentially is a machine for developing consciousness, is that of unity consciousness, or waves of constant enlightened universal consciousness. So that is the energy which is coming in now. And that's very different from a lot of the earlier years where we would build through duality. And that's why this planet has been so much in duality. But now, at the fundamental level of consciousness and energy waves in the reality that we inhabit, unity consciousness, not me and other, but rather we're all one, is what's becoming predominant, so that entities or thought forms or organizations or agendas which are devoted or which are built on a dualistic worldview, say that of the monetary system that we live under now, are bound to collapse. And that's what's basically fueling all of the transformation now. And So that there's a lot of objective science in this. And what Kalaman says, which I think is congruent with many, many other sources, is that Earth is now set on a gradual setting of a potential to reach advanced utopian planetary status, a virtual Garden of Eden. In other words, this year, 2011, culminating in October, he chooses that October 28th, you know, he has a complicated thing going back to the Big Bang and terminating in October 28th, 2011. So, you know, he's written a number of books and it's very interesting to go back and read them. But we're at the culmination of this process that started with the Big Bang, or a culmination point, and this milestone marks the beginning of entry of Earth into a long prophesized golden age of utopia, or another way of looking at it is a 2012 to 13 positive timeline, or 2011 to 2025 positive timeline, or a positive timeline. And so it's as though, in terms of the virtual reality program that we're in, it's now set on utopia. So, you know, like, jump in. So anyway, so this is sort of the background frameworks that are governing the time-space hologram that we're in, that are governing the universe that we're in, which is different from the time-space hologram because the third dimensional slice of the time, you know, it's very interlocking, and I'm looking forward to having some over the coffee table conversations with Andy so we can compare notes between the time-space hologram and the universe. And yeah, I just...
Before you switch, I didn't understand those graphs or what they're showing.
Okay, that is kind of a fragment. It's really not meant to be comprehensive, but it's to just give you a flavor of the fact that consciousness, there's a correlation between consciousness and what is occurring at the interdimensional portal of our universe, and the sort of energy wave that is coming in, and that it took as long as 1755 to 1999 to effect as much change as is occurring between March 9, 2011 and October 28, 2011. That is the relative rate of the acceleration of change and the acceleration of consciousness and the acceleration of time. And that's the significance of this seminar and symposium taking place now. We're at a maximal period of acceleration of consciousness so that all of us can begin to share these ideas in confluence with the waves of unity consciousness that are emanating from the interdimensional portal at the core of our universe, which is one universe in the multiverse. Now, and just to carry out some further ideas before letting this go, the intentional universe. Carl Johan Kalaman's most recent book is The Intentional Universe, and that is that the universe is intentional. And that's something that I'm sure everyone in the room, in their own way, is a lesson that we've learned over time and that we experience over time. And so that these universe singularity energy waves serve as carrier waves of the universe's mind and spirit software. The way that the intentional universe, some call it source, some call it the sea of light, some call it God, lets us know of its intention for consciousness in the entire universe is through these singularity waves. I'll give you an example, if we look at the last two periods in the time acceleration matrix, one arose from 1755 to 1999. Then from 1999, there was as much change from 1755 as there was from 755 to 1999 was a discrete change period. In 1999, there started what was called the galactic era, or the galactic underworld. And that is when everybody's mind turned to issues of the galaxy, a sort of a galactic heritage. And those were the waves that, according to this theory, were emanating from the interdimensional portal at the core of the universe. So, for example, the book Exopolitics, which deals with galactic and universal organization, was written in the year 1999, the first year that the universe started emanating these waves. Because what we do as individuals, we're like radio transducers, and we can come up and pick up these fields and think of that as the mind of God, or source. And so then you just pick up what the universe is emanating. We all think that our thoughts are so original. Well, they may be in one sense, and in another sense, they are a reflection of these universal waves of energy which are coming out. So that between 1999 and March 9, 2011 was the galactic era. And on March 9, 2011, we turned over to the universal era. So that's why now everybody's thinking about the universe and dimensions, the dimensional ecology of the multiverse. So that's why, just in my little mind that's picking up its transductory thought in the way that I'm wired, I now am moving from exopolitics to the dimensional ecology of the multiverse, because the multiverse, the interdimensional portal, flipped over into the universal era. That's the energy waves it's broadcasting, how all is connected to all, everything that is. Is that fairly clear? I don't want to get too caught up in question and answer right now. Okay, so the universe energy waves that we humans tune into and commit to determine our planetary status and how we reach our potential as a planet. Okay, let me read that again. As a scientific principle, the universe energy waves we humans tune into and commit to determine our planetary status and how we reach our potential as a planet. That's a scientific principle. So if we're all tuned into energy waves of duality, of projection of duality, of war, of conflict, of the other, of destruction, that will impede our reaching our planetary status, which is a utopia. That is what's planned for our planet at this time. And that's what we mean by the intentional universe. Will Earth be a dystopia or a utopia? That's the kind of the classical question. Is it going off into the catastrophic realm or into the positive realm? And you can marshal facts and data for either for a catastrophic timeline or for a positive timeline. You know, and both are really powerful. And the good news is that the universe's singularity is now emanating utopia consciousness waves on its carrier waves. The more we humans are individually and collectively tuned into the universal energy of enlightened unity consciousness and committed to achieving unity non-dualistic consciousness, then the stronger the positive timeline becomes, and the more rapidly we achieve our potential as a planet. In other words, the potential to reach advanced utopian planet status. So these are just elementary scientific principles that kind of at the macro scale. Now, the spiritual dimensions, and here we have a representation of the natural interdimensional portal between the exopolitical dimension, which you're in now, and the afterlife dimension. And the spiritual dimensions encompass the dimensions of the afterlife or the interlife, alternative ways of saying, that are inhabited by intelligent civilizations of souls and interdimensional beings. There's some experimental findings that we'll describe as we go on, that what we call God is the totality of the spiritual dimensions. In other words, each of us has a holographic fragment, sort of an egg of light, of the sea of light of God in us, known as a soul. And the spiritual dimensions as a whole is what we call God. So we're collectively creating the exopolitical dimensions, which are the universes of the multiverse. The exopolitical dimensions encompass what we normally call our known physical multiverse. The exopolitical dimensions are the dimensions where souls from the spiritual dimensions incarnate into a diversity of lives as humans on Earth or extraterrestrials and interdimensional beings on other planets or in parallel universes. We'll search out and find the interdimensional portal, and it will cross over into the dimension of the afterlife, which is part of the spiritual dimensions. And the spiritual dimensions, experimentally, I'm describing conclusions of experimental data that we'll go into later on in the presentation. The spiritual dimensions encompass the dimensions of the afterlife or the interlife that are inhabited by the intelligent civilizations of souls and interdimensional beings, spiritual beings. You know, gods and angels and things like that. They're not really extraterrestrials. Exopolitical dimensions are what we normally call the physical universe or the physical multiverse. Because we're in the physical universe now. The spiritual dimensions create the exopolitical dimensions. This exopolitical dimension that we're in right now, this 3D reality, is a creation of the intelligent community of souls and all of the beings inside the spiritual dimension create the exopolitical dimension that we're in. And its purpose is to develop us souls so that we evolve in turn to becoming gods that create our own universes. So it's like we're just an expanding God experience, according to this slice of data. And the exopolitical dimensions are the dimensions where souls from spiritual dimensions incarnate into a diversity of lives as humans on Earth or extraterrestrials and interdimensional beings on other planets or in parallel universes. Okay? This is just definitions and making differences, distinctions between. We're in a created reality now. When we cross over through the interdimensional portal into the afterlife, we're going into the spiritual dimension, which is a slightly different type of created reality because it consists of creators. And the only reason why we can't call ourselves a creator is because we're kind of still young souls and we were created, and we know what the process of that is like. They take God and take a hologram of God, a portion of God, and that's us. So, you know, but we're not yet creators because we have to come out here, and this is where we get polished and where we grow. That's oversimplification, but it gives the essence of it. So that's, again, we're in the dimensional ecology of the multiverse hypothesis. In the spiritual dimensions, replicable evidence tells us that God, or Source, is the spiritual dimensions of the multiverse as a whole, and that our human souls are hologrammatic components of God or Source. In other words, within each of us is a hologrammatic particle that is God. Exopolitical dimensions also encompass all parallel universes and dimensions that exist, including those where extraterrestrial and interdimensional intelligent civilizations reside. Our universe, galaxy, solar system, and planet Earth are within the exopolitical dimensions that are created by intelligent civilizations and beings within the spiritual dimensions for a variety of goals centered principally around the development of souls that in turn can become godlike through experience and growth. That's what all this craziness in the entire universe is goal-directed toward, it appears. Apart from having fun, drama, God the novelist, God the poet, all of those aspects. Okay, so now, one of the sciences that we use then in mapping the exopolitical dimension. So let's start out by mapping the exopolitical dimension, which is one of the things that we want to do in order to support the hypothesis that we live in a dimensional ecology. Exopolitics is the science of relations among intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. Exopolitics uses the concepts and structures of cosmology and ontology to frame its essential questions. As a branch of philosophy and science, cosmology addresses the nature of the multiverse, asking questions about the functions, components, and purposes of the multiverse. In other words, we're engaging in an exercise in exopolitics now. And another function is the development of typologies of intelligent civilizations, which is part of the ontological nature of exopolitics. In other words, a theory of types. What am I? What is a human? What are the different types of humans? That is an exercise of exopolitics. And so that's why when asked, going back to the Oxford, before I could write a book on extraterrestrial civilizations and the law, there wasn't even in existence a typology of the extraterrestrial civilizations. I mean, how does a third-dimensional civilization acquire jurisdiction over a seventh-dimensional Arcturian? You can't get there from the Earth. So what we discovered was that we had to develop a dimension-based typology of intelligent civilizations. In other words, the dimension in which an intelligent civilization is based is its most fundamental typological, locational, and developmental criterion. And if you go into the contactee research, etc., you find out that intelligent civilizations in the multiverse self-report themselves as being dimension-based. I am an Arcturian from the 6th dimension. I am a Pleiadian from the 5th dimension. That is the most essential descriptor of that civilization. There's another typology called the Kardashev scale that was developed by Nikolai Kardashev. It was popularized by shall I say famous or infamous?
Still famous.
Famous, okay. By the famous Michio Kaku. It is based on a civilization's level of technological advancement rather than on the multiverse dimension in which the civilization is based. In other words, we're a zero-type civilization because we are still using the resources of the planet as our energy base. And we're aspiring to be a one-type civilization, at which point we'll be using the resources of the solar system. Although I think that that's much too rigid because it's not the solar system. I mean, anti-gravity is based on a different view of where energy resides in the universe. It doesn't reside in organic matter on your planet. It resides in the interstices of the universe itself. But it's a type 1 civilization, and this is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it'll give an exopolitical framework. And the reason why Mr. Kardashev, the New World Order, has adopted the Kardashev scale, and maybe why Dr. Michio Kaku is pushing it, is that the New World Order's plan is to make Earth a type 1 civilization under a one world government serving the current Illuminati power structure and an Orion Gray, ET, and Draco reptilian alliance. And I'm just putting that out to give you a preview of coming attractions in the presentation. In other words, there's a reason why they don't use the dimension-based model typology of intelligent civilizations, because that would teach us all about the light and love-oriented dimensions in civilizations. And instead, they say, oh, it's all about energy and anti-gravity machines, which gets away from the issue of the type and orientation of soul. And that's why that's so convenient to push the type 1 planetary status on us inside the Kardashev scale. That's a way of boxing in our cosmic perceptual framework. Okay, did I communicate with that?
Yes.
Do people see that? Okay, great. I'm sorry. Dr. Kaku is doing increasingly egregious acts, not only in teleportation, but in cosmology.
Yeah, well, I said that Project Pegasus was fiction. I'm certain that it wasn't.
Small point, Dyson was the first one to come up with that classification.
Oh, good. Well, Dyson. Is that yourself or?
No, D1.
Oh, okay.
Freeman Dyson.
Okay.
Princess.
Okay. Well, they give it to the some people give it to Kardashev, but that's duly noted, and I will make the adjustments. Now, what is the dimension-based typology of intelligent civilizations? Well, that establishes an evidence-based typological model for intelligent civilizations and governance authorities that starts with the third dimension. We are the third dimension, which is the dimension of time-space. In other words, that's our kind of basic dimensional structure or infrastructure of the virtual reality entity, artifact that we're in. And there are solar system, third dimension, solar system, intelligent civilizations that we can point to, deep space civilizations. They're hyperdimensional civilizations, and that covers a multitude. That just means civilizations that are based in dimensions other than the time-space dimension. And once one gets into the other dimensions, there are various, that's a very interesting line of research, because there are dimensions that, instead of being based on time and space, are mediated by forces like light and love. And where love is an active cosmic principle, as is light. So these are dimensions that we as human minds, as third-dimensional human souls and entities, are aspiring to. Although, as we should see, we were created as a very special entity. and that is as a 12-strand DNA, third-dimensional light being. That's what Homo sapiens is. And we'll get to that later on. And the next dimension, the next component of the typology is intelligent civilizations, governance authorities. And that's things like the Galactic Federation and other governance bodies that exist within various parts of our galaxy, our neighborhood, our galaxy, the universe, the multiverse, etc. Okay, now deep space civilizations. These are intelligent civilizations that are based in the third dimension on a planet, solar system, or space station in our or another galaxy or in some other location in this known physical third dimensional universe. And again, that's the standard picture of the Hubble Deep Space Field. That is third dimension deep space. That's the time-space hologram. And I'm looking forward to conversations with Andy as to see, is that a virtual reality projection, or are we looking at an actual, third dimensional progression from the Big Bang, with all of its stars and all of the galaxies and all of the developmental entities that occur in a universe with this design where time and space are the primary design criteria. Now, if we look at the third dimensional deep space civilizations, some of the more recent estimates is that there are at least 50 billion planets in the Milky Way, and 500 million of those are in the Goldilocks zone that would be Earth-like, and they would support Earth-like life. That does not mean that there's not life. We're still talking about 3D life, third-dimensional life. We're not talking about hyperdimensional life. So there are 500 million planets, and this is a very conservative figure in the Milky Way galaxy that are Earth-like, or that have that Goldilocks zone in terms of probabilities. So looking at, and again, what we're going to go through here is we're going to go through the third dimension civilizations, the empirical evidence for the existence of third dimension solar system civilizations, because that tends to support or prove one element of the dimensional ecology model or hypothesis. And then we'll go to the hyperdimensional civilizations, and we'll show the empirical proof for different types of hyperdimensional civilizations. And we're going to go through that, all of that proof, and that's what's in this presentation. So I just wanted to kind of show where we are right now. Now, in terms of solar system civilizations of the third dimension, we know of at least two that we can prove according to the laws of evidence. One is our human civilization here on Earth. Now, ontologically speaking, there are people who say you can't prove your own existence. But we aren't talking about ontology, we're talking about the laws of evidence. Because this as a practical matter. In ontological philosophy, we could sit here all day, but we're talking practically speaking. In other words, can we prove that there's a human civilization here on Earth? And the answer is yes. And through evidence, it's kind of self-evident. So if you want some more evidence, you can go to an anthropological conference and view all the evidence that the humans exist on Earth. And there is an intelligent, and we have now through the laws of evidence, that there is an intelligent human civilization living under the surface of Mars that reportedly enjoys a strategic relationship with the United States government. So, this, the proof of this segment of the presentation, this really shows how important the two whistleblowers that are here this week, and my colleagues with us, Andy and Laura, are in the scheme, in the human scheme of things. Because were it not for Andy and Laura coming forward and several other very brave souls, at the risk of their lives, we would not be able to prove that there is an intelligent human civilization on Mars. And that's a fact. We'd be stuck back in the Dark Ages. So I think that we have to acknowledge that all of us living on this planet owe a deep debt of gratitude to brave whistleblowers like Andy, Laura, and a number of the other individuals that I'm going to mention. New scientific data and the law of evidence support a view that Mars, in other words, that there is third-dimensional solar system intelligent civilizations on Mars in our solar system. And the law of evidence is a methodology for evaluating witness and documentary evidence. And eyewitness evidence to indigenous life on Mars. There's Andy, and he's a former DARPA Project Pegasus participant. There's DoD scientist Arthur Neumann. They are eyewitnesses to the existence of indigenous life on Mars, indigenous extraterrestrial life on Mars, the indigenous Martian civilization. In other words, there's a civilization on Mars that is different. It's not part of the U.S. secret base there. It's actually a Martian civilization. Now, if we trace it back, as we'll see, to 9500 BC, it's most plausible that Earth and Mars were part of a single interplanetary society that was torn asunder when a fragment of the Vela supernova entered the solar system and, as was mentioned, caused great ecological damage to Mars, as well as to Earth, destroying what Plato called the great maritime civilization called Atlantis. In other words, that's where all those myths come from. And that prior to 9500 BC with the Vela supernova, there's evidence, which I assume Andy will be showing on Thursday, that ties and that demonstrates the existence of a common interplanetary society between Earth and Mars prior to 9500 BC. That was about 11,500 years ago. But here, we now have eyewitness evidence to indigenous life on Mars through the testimony of Andrew Bashago, through the testimony of former DoD scientist Arthur Neumann. We have eyewitness evidence to U.S. bases on Mars through former U.S. servicemen Michael Ralph, Andrew Bashago, and Arthur Neumann, and a corroborative Mars witness, Laura Eisenhower. She hasn't actually seen the bases on Mars, but circumstantially, she was involved in an attempted enrollment in the Mars colony. And we now have documentary evidence of modern life on Mars in terms of images of Martian humanoids and animal life from the NASA rovers, notably a number of photographs, one of which is PIA 10214, and the principal scientist who has discovered those images, again, is Andrew Bashago. So you can see the seminal role that the gentleman who is a fellow speaker in this conference plays in human history and in the advancement of human science.
Alfred, if I might add,
Yeah.
just before you move on, Brett Stillings has now come forward as
Right.
a whistleblower regarding our training
Yeah.
and being up there
Yeah, so,
and naming the individuals he was up there with, to include myself and Courtney Hunt. So Brett's coming forward in August in that interview with Jaime Maussan. So
good.
he's certainly in that
Uh,
eyewitness.
Right, exactly. So it'll be William Brett Stillings is now, and that's fresh news that was revealed last night publicly. Okay, this is how breaking this news is. And this is, the Mars and Earth have not been a united society since for 11,500 years. And it's so traumatic an event in the human psyche that it's the source of what Barbara Hank Cloud calls catastrophobia. That's why we're all like on pins and needles about, is the world going to end? Because it did end once, 11,500 years ago. And it's in our DNA. Now, with regard to the eyewitness evidence, Andy talked about these issues last night. In other words, he met 3 Martian astronauts at Curtiss-Wright in New Jersey in 1971 with his father, while the Martian astronauts were on a liaison mission to Earth. And that's a picture of one of the hangars at the Curtiss-Wright facility. And in 1981, and again, this is going to be expanded upon, Andy made 2 quantum access Tesla-based teleportation trips from a CIA building in El Segundo, California. That's just a map of El Segundo. And on one of these, he was accompanied by one of them by CIA officer Courtney M. Hunt, and there he encountered a kind of plesiosaur that appears on the surface of Mars. And I think Andy spoke about that last night. And as far as corroborating witnesses, these include Dr. Jean Maria Arrigo, an ethicist who works closely with U.S. military and intelligence agencies. She's backtracked on her words, but that was because of political pressure, we believe. And U.S. Army Captain Ernest Garcia, and now, of course, William Brett Stillings has come forth. So, in terms of the law of evidence, a very powerful case is being mounted. More eyewitness evidence. On top there is former DoD scientist Arthur Neumann. He's holding up his special U.S. Department of Defense passport that I examined and gave him access to all of these facilities, including teleporting plausibly, possibly, well, either from the U.S. or from other teleports to the U.S. secret base on Mars. He said there is life on Mars, there are bases on Mars, I've been there. And Michael Relf was on there from 1976 to 96, 20 years as a permanent security staff of the U.S. secret base on Mars. He was time traveled via teleportation. He was teleported to Mars in 1976, and in 96, he was time traveled and age regressed 20 years, landing back at a U.S. military base in 1976 Earth time. And then he served 6 years in the U.S. military on Earth before being honorably discharged in 1982. And this is how I would imagine they hide the permanent staff of the Mars base in these in some sort of niches in time-space. So it's very difficult for the constitutional government to access this information, and for the civilian population and the media, the genuine media, the fourth estate, to access this information. Mr. Ralph described two types of individuals at the secret Mars colony. Number one, people visiting Mars temporarily, politicians, etc. They travel to and from Mars by jump gate. They visit for a few weeks and return. They are not time travel back. They are VIPs. They are off limits. Two, permanent staff. They spend 20 years duty cycle. At the end of their cycle, they are age reversed and time shot back to their time-space origin point. They are sent back with memories blocked. They are sent back to complete their destiny on Earth. And that's a photograph of Stephanie Ralph, Michael Ralph's wife, who collaborated in writing his two books with him. What is the strategic purpose of the U.S. Mars? Purposes of the U.S. Mars base? According here again, we have a great deal of convergence and congruence. Andy has written, when I visited Mars via jump room in 1981 to 83, I was told that the U.S. was sending thousands of Americans to Mars via jump room. Number one, to establish an extraterrestrial defense posture, and two, to establish such a pattern of civilian visitation to Mars that the U.S. could one day assert a territorial claim to Mars. And with regard to Michael Ralph, if you read his book, The Mars Records, Volume 1 and 2, and you can access that book, you can download it for free, those 2 volumes, at exopolitics.com. You will see that he sets out a history of hostile armed exchanges with an enemy that appears to be a hyperdimensional intelligent civilization from outside of the solar system. So the Mars base was under active hostile fire, and he describes a lot of skirmishes and battles that both he undertook in. His spacecraft was damaged. He was wounded. There's a second set of volumes by a fellow soldier, a wounded soldier that was up there with him, that also describes these battles. So they were up there and were engaged with an enemy that appears to be a hyperdimensional intelligent civilization from outside of the solar system. When I asked Michael who the enemy was, I've received as yet no response, which is a pattern that it seems like the journalists and the media, I think he's not ready to go on the record with that, although, as we'll see later on in the presentation, we have some ideas of who the enemy is, or was. Yes.
Alfred, might I jump in here just again? When I initially began speaking about Mars, what was in my conscious recollection was my first and second training visit up there in the summer of 1981 under the tutelage of Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA. I had had training the previous summer in Weed under Ed Dames, which remained memory blocked. Also memory blocked were the trips from fall of 81 through 1983, where I was regularly going up there. So my initial public statements were just at the threshold of my memories at that point, which were the 2 training jumps in the summer of 81. Then after Brett Stillings contacted me in early 2010, we began discussing, and basically the fragmentary memories that we had began to coalesce into an understanding of what had actually happened to us. So that, then after that point, the training in 1980, and then our many trips up there in the early 80s came back to conscious recollection. So this data here kind of catches me between my initial memories of the training of going up, and then the new information that's come forward and been corroborated mutually between Brett Stillings and myself. So I was going up regularly there in the early 80s, primarily as an errand, bringing a data disk up to one of the U.S. facilities up there.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, yes.
In that slide before, politicians were teleported to Mars, but they were not teleported back to Earth. How did they get back to Earth?
No, they were teleported to Mars, but they're not time travel back. In other words, they teleport them to Mars on timeline alpha, and they're teleported back on timeline alpha. They aren't regressed to another timeline. It's like that they took an airplane ride from California to New York and back. But if you're a member of the permanent staff there, I suppose for security purposes and to hide it from the constitutional government, to make it more difficult for the constitutional government to find, they would teleport the permanent staff there but time travel them back. So there's no record, there's no military record of the permanent staff being there. And then Michael Ralph serves out the remainder of his duty from 76 to 82 in the regular army, in the regular armed forces. So that if ever questioned, he would say, oh yeah, I was a ranger from 1976 to 1982 at Camp Lejeune, or whatever. I mean, that's Marine, but whatever. Yeah, Ken.
Well, even, you just mentioned that, and there's a very practical consideration. Instead of putting 6 years in service to the country, the military, you put 26 years into service in the country. What about his pension? What about...
Well, yeah, all those issues, well, yeah, he's not worried about, yeah. But I think that functionally, I would hypothesize that one of the reasons would be to hide, that's another level of hiding it from the constitutional government, from the congressional oversight.
Yeah. I mean, there's a basis for a law.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. What do you mean by, under the permanent staff, they went back and said they are age reversed?
Yeah, that's like happened to Michael Ralph. In other words, he was sent there in 1976, and he served from 1976 to 1996 on Mars. Then, when he finished his 20-year duty cycle, they time traveled him back, so he landed back on Earth on the very day that he left.
Right.
So that from the Earth timeline, it's as though nothing happened, and then he just served out 6 years in the Army until 1982 and was discharged.
Was his body 20 years older in appearance, or what?
I would defer to Andy.
Well, actually, as improbable as it sounds, I was age progressed and then progressively regressed back to my age 10 anatomy when I was serving on Project Pegasus as a child. So, as improbable as Michael Ralph's account is that he not only was jumped from to Mars, but then served 20 years there and was age regressed so he could be returned back with no evidence that he had been there. I took part in an exercise where somehow they utilized a technology to age progress me. This was undertaken in one of those summers in the early 70s when I was in New Mexico, one of those time loops that they architected by having us teleport to New Mexico, spend the summer there, and then teleport back to New Jersey, arriving on the afternoon of the day that we had originally left. So one of those summers when I was in C2, I believe it was summer of 71 or 72, I don't think it really matters, I took part in this age progression exercise, I think prior to the jumps to 2045, because they had to achieve something at the level of cellular metabolism. So they utilized a device where I actually basically rapidly aged from around age 10 to my mid-40s. And when that was done, I actually was physically relocated outside of the Sandia campus, outside of the Sandia National Lab grounds. And my father had explained that you're going to be somewhere out there in Albuquerque, you have to find your way back to Sandia and talk your way past the guard post. Of course, now, after 9/11, with the advent of Homeland Security, I would have been shot if I had walked back to the guard post and tried to talk myself back into Sandia. So I can corroborate Michael Ralph's account, which is a long-standing claim, because I, in fact, was age progressed as a child, and I read a number of classic American novels in an isolation room with walls that wouldn't even let me see outside. It was basically like being in a hospital ward with these walls where I couldn't see anything. I was provided several voluminous great American novels to read, during the 3 weeks that my cellular metabolism then readjusted itself back to the form of a 10-year-old boy. So Project Pegasus was in possession of this age progression and regression technology. And obviously one of the advantages of it is you could have somebody do something for many years and then conceal it by not just teleporting them back in time, but literally biologically reversing their aging process.
Did you have any side effects from that technology?
I don't know. One of the forms of injustice that I was subjected to by the U.S. government is I wasn't even given medical monitoring, much less medical insurance, or given veterans benefits, for example.
Right.
So when my skin fell apart, as a 12-year-old, after I had been dismissed, just ordinarily discharged from the program, and then we moved to Southern California, and I developed these open sores all over my chest, shoulders, and back, and the keloid scarring that resulted. That may have been literally a side effect of having my cellular metabolism disrupted by being age progressed and then regressed. So, but then again, I was never checked.